And again, this grew out of some discussions that Dave and Rob and I had following the last meeting. We had 3 different ideas of how to proceed. And I took some of your guys' ideas, and I certainly stuck with my cable idea, and kind of melded the two together and came up with something that semi-works. And let me explain semi-works. Yaw bit me again. All right, yaw is left turn, right turn in a car. Now, if you're thinking about our motion seats, we want them to pitch, and we want them to pitch, lean forward, lean back. We want them to roll. We want to add the third dimension later of the elevation. We do not want to do this at all if the screen is there, because then the guy's got to turn his head to stay focused on the screen, and all of a sudden you're really losing your aspect, your immersion effect.
That's right.
So yaw bit me when we were putting this together, in the fact that if you don't have something rigid there, the whole thing just wants to twist its way down. So you'll see in a couple of minutes when we go in the other room, what we've got is 2 chairs side by side. 1 rod on the bottom is controlling pitch with a couple of lines, cables if you will. Obviously we're not just going to use cheap rope later, and pulleys. And then another rod is controlling roll. Okay? But what I didn't expect is that we're going to have all this twisting motion, and we did. So I put in a temporary fix, and temporary it is. If you've got 2 chairs side by side, an inch apart, as they do this kind of thing, they should stay, roughly the inch apart. Actually, as you do the math, when they start the roll, that inch is vertical in between. So if you're looking at a horizontal, that might get down to 1/4 of an inch or something. Okay. And you'll actually see imperfections with the way that I built it. They're at slightly different heights. The chairs aren't quite square.
Well,
the
you
cage
had
is
Steve
square.
help you, you said, right?
Well, the other thing is, one recommendation, I've learned this over and over again, don't use dull tools, such as my saw blade was pretty dull. So, some of my cuts weren't as square as they could be and all these kinds of things. But one of the key things that ended up happening, I used oak for the rods. We'll discuss it out here just so you get a better chance to visualize it and understand it before you go in there and see what's really happening. You figure your dowel rod that you've got to hang your clothes on in your closet, okay? So it's, in our case, 4 feet long, and what we want is we want one eye bolt coming down, and we want the matching eye bolt going up. So as the rod turns, as it turns, you can actually see it's giving line one way, it's pulling line the other. So one is pulling and one is giving, all right? There's a couple of assumptions that are here, that these guys are straight on, Obviously, you'd see that as a problem if it's not straight up and down. But what ends up happening, because these are oak rods, and they got, heavy grain in it, and I had a dull drill bit and wasn't paying enough close attention, is that I didn't, even though I started in the center of the rod, the grain threw me off. The grain twisted me a little bit. And it doesn't take much to cause a lot of slop. The other thing that ends up happening is the rope has a tendency to want to go to its closest point, which with these guys that have 3/4 of an inch in the eyelet, now I've got you double that up, you've got another 1.5 inches of slop. All right, all of this kind of stuff is causing some binding, and you'll see that. And I should also be able to do the pitch and the roll. I'm trying to do it. And you can see how it's binding. And back the other way. So, again, the concept was learn what we had to learn and see if instead of having 3 actuators per seat, or 2 in this particular case, if we're only going to have to do 2 axes of motion, I'm going to try to move them back. Sorry, the other one. Straight up. And to see if we can have 2 motors run a whole row of them. Okay? So this works kind of. A lot of learning, which is what prototypes are all about.
Yep.
Did you want to talk about your ideas? You know, going off of this instead of using the lines?
Instead of using what lines?
Instead of using these lines, I thought your idea was basically to have a mechanical linkage.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Okay.
think about like what you see at the top of a merry-go-round, where you've got rods that come out, and then they have a sort of a crook in them with an element that connects to that, so then they can move up and down, and it's a firm linkage instead of using cords. The one thing I really like about any system that uses rods like this is just the fact that you can have a motor drive it instead of a linear actuator, because motors are cheap, linear actuators are expensive. So, I mean, you know, we can still put like limit switches on this to make sure that everything is, you know, stays within the specs that we need it to and all that fun stuff.
We can put the motor in the basement and you know, drive it by chain or something.
Yeah.
Some real positive, you know, instead of a belt that could slip, we use a chain or something.
Yeah.
So the sound is down there if that becomes
Yeah.
a problem.
Exactly.
Dave, you're looking. I'm really anxious to get your comments on this.
I'm still a big fan of mechanical linkage.
Yeah.
Also, the only difficulty with mechanical linkage is noise, if anything.
Yeah.
Well, the honest thought I'm having right now is part of what you're experiencing could be replaced by using chain. But that would be, in my opinion, it may end up being noisier than mechanical linkage. So, but I agree with Rob on the respect that everything has to come back to something universal that does actually eliminate the linear actuator. And I think that the concept of cables ultimately gets us one of the best ideas for the control of noise, and also it works well with one of the safeties that we developed a while ago that isn't utilized here. But I'm looking at your pivot point.
Oh, you want to see what that is? You know what it is? It's a carriage bolt.
Yeah,
It's
sitting
a
on top of the head of
round-headed
the
bolt.
carriage bolt,
Exactly.
yeah.
So you know your analogy of the universal being a ball. It's like,
Yeah.
what can I get that's cheap and would function
Yeah.
the same? Carriage bolt and just drill it a little recessed in here. So sitting on a ball.
One other aspect of mechanical linkage is we might be able to control some of the issues with yaw by actually sleeving it and running it through something.
Okay.
But again, there will be limitations to that too, because as your angle changes, if that rod's stationary, the attachment point also changes.
Right.
Meaning it's now having to slide back and forth at the base of the chair. You know.
Yeah, I definitely think there's going to have to be some fundamental design feature that really helps cut down on the yaw, so that even if there is some slop, the yaw doesn't immediately become a huge problem.
Right. And that was, to me, the most critical learning that I had was yaw bit me again, and it should be the last time. So we got to calculate it in.
Something that in what I was developing, I looked at like mechanical linkages and everything else. And what I ultimately landed on is we have this idea for, okay, here's our universal, here's the sleeve to control catastrophic failure, and we're pretty much sold on that. We're obviously sold on steel being the final product.
Absolutely.
None of us have considered, and correct me if I'm wrong, if that universal is functioning, it doesn't matter where it functions. It doesn't have to be right at the base of the seat. So what if we threw our control up over the top of it? Because the exact same thing that you're trying to do with cable could go right over the top of a spear and then go straight down. So there's your tension and control done entirely different, because you're literally passing over it and you're asking it to go with it. Now your cables would end up moving ever so much, but I'm wondering if there's less variance in that than what we're experiencing right now.